Hello and welcome to A View for You, a twice-monthly journal about people and events of interest in the San Francisco Bay Area. My name is Peter Camarda. I'll be your host tonight, and we're broadcasting to you live on the San Francisco Public Access Channel, Comcast Channel 76, AT&T Channel 99, and Astound Channel 30. Tonight is the third installment in a series we're doing on poetry, and tonight we're going to be listening to Islamic poetry, mostly poetry of Rumi. And I'm very pleased to have with me as my guest tonight Shantanu Phukan, who is Assistant Professor of Comparative Religion at San Jose State University, and a man who speaks many languages and translates poetry in several of them. Welcome, Shantanu.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's begin by talking a little bit about Rumi, since we'll be beginning with him. What time period does Rumi belong to?
So Rumi is a 13th century poet, early to mid 13th century. He was born in what is now northern Afghanistan. And when he was very young, about 6 or 7 years old, he and his family left Afghanistan, mostly in search of employment, it seems. His father was a canon lawyer, and settled first in Baghdad and then went to Mecca, and then by way of Damascus ended up in what was then the frontier of Islam, the central, what is now central Turkey, the ancient city of Iconium, or modern city of Konya. And that's where he spent the rest of his life as a Sufi, as a leader of the Sufi community.
And I think you said that his father was also a Sufi?
His father was certainly a Sufi who started an order or brotherhood of Muslim mystics called the Mevlevis, and they exist today. They're here, they're based in Redwood City of all places, the American Mevlevi order.
So it's still with us. So would he have been a dervish? Would he have whirled, or was it a different kind of?
Well, the tradition of whirling to poetry as it is being recited, this kind of poetry, began, I don't know that it began with Rumi, but it certainly is it's a cornerstone of the Sufi spiritual discipline within the brotherhood of the Mevlevis only.
And would Rumi have been at the time of the Crusades? Is he roughly parallel to that?
The Crusades were very much part of the context in which Rumi was living. So Rumi arrives in Konya around 1213, 1214, something like that. And the crusade which led to the sacking of Constantinople by the Venetian European forces was in 1204.
Okay.
The frontier between Islamdom and Christendom ran right about 100 or so miles west of what is now Konya.
So Rumi would have really been on the borderline then. He would have been right there in the area of fracture and conflict and everything.
Yes, Rumi was very much on the borderline, and his patrons, the Seljuk kings, the Turkish Seljuk kings, were very aware of being on the frontier of Islam. Yes.
We have a little picture now. This is actually a postage stamp from Afghanistan that commemorates Rumi, and I guess that's not obviously a portrait from life, but something that was done later on. But you were telling me that the buildings there in the back are actually the funeral?
Yes, the representation probably is an 18th or 19th century representation of a Mevlevi Sufi with that characteristic turban, very elaborate turban that you see there, that you'll see in the next picture also. The buildings over which the portrait is hovering is the tomb complex of Rumi, which is even today a major pilgrimage site for many Muslims, especially for the Mevlevis. And now what you're seeing is the inside of that domed building. And you're looking at the tomb of Rumi. And at the very head of that tomb is the turban that was worn by the Mevlevis, and sticking out from the middle of it is the I don't know, I guess it's the Mevlevi turbans got more and more elaborate as time went on, and that's part of the turban was the sort of the crystallization of the honor of a person. So tombs are often capped with a turban.
And then this is a slightly wider view of the,
right.
that location.
So the poetry that I'm going to be reciting would often be sung and presented in concerts called sama concerts at the Tomb of a Saint.
So we have a picture here of a concert in progress. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
So this is a 17th century painting from India, and it shows one of these concerts, a sama concert in progress, at the tomb complex of a Sufi. And so this is a painting in three registers. So in the first register you have the assembled audience, and in the middle register, in the arena, you have the musicians who are reciting the poetry that's older Sufis are listening to and are going into ecstasy as they're listening to the poetry being sung. And the protocol in among the Sufis still is, that if somebody goes into ecstasy upon hearing a verse, then the singers are required to keep on repeating that until the person asks them to move on. As you can see here, many are going into ecstasy and they're being held up by young men.
So there was really a kind of altered consciousness that would come to people in these ceremonies.
Yes, and much of this music was strongly rhythmic. As you can see, the young men are holding drums in their hands, and so the words might send you into ecstasy, but the rhythm might also do that.
So it was kind of all the senses were brought into play.
All of them, yes.
All right, and then the other thing about Rumi that's so interesting is that he wrote a lot of his poetry to this fellow called Shams. Can you talk a little bit about love and devotion in his poetry and Shams?
Yes, but first let me just say a word about the genre of poetry that I'm going to be reciting. It's called a ghazal. Ghazals are lyric poetry, so the theme is invariably the loss of the beloved, or the loss of love. Either due to the natural propensity of love to slip through our fingers, or because of death. Mm-hmm. It's loss, one way or the other. And this interesting thing about Rumi's poetry is that he addresses a lot of his poetry to Shams. Shams was a shadowy figure who showed up in Konya, and to whom Rumi apprenticed himself as a Sufi disciple. There's much speculation as to whether this was also a love relationship or not. Going by the poetry, you would think that there was at least a very strong component of attraction of some kind. The word Shams was born in what is now northeastern Iran. He also made his way through Baghdad and then eventually through Damascus to Konya. And he was a Sufi master. His name means the sun, Shams.
And there's a lot in this poetry about the sun and fire and light and the power
yes,
of all
and
those things.
Rumi takes on the persona of the yearning lover to Shams, and then he makes much of this name Shams, the sun, using it as a metaphor. So Rumi is the moon to Shams as the sun, and the moon borrowing its light from the sun.
And this is a picture supposedly of Shams, again an illustration I guess that someone did, supposedly representing Shams. So he was quite a central figure. I guess in that sense though, the poet had to have someone to devote the poetry to. If not Shams, it would have had to been a woman lover or some other friend. Or
typically in a ghazal, the beloved would never be mentioned by name. One of the unusual things about Rumi's poetry is that he does mention Shams by name in the very last, particularly in the last couplets of the poetry that you'll be listening to. Shams will be mentioned, and the word Shams, sun, the image of the sun and the moon will be, or the sun and the candle, the sun and the fire, light would be played with.
All right, well, let's get right to the poetry then. We don't want to lose too much time. So these are all your own translations, as I understand. Is that right?
Yes, all of these are my own translations. All of these, except for the last poem, are ghazals. Mm-hmm. Ghazal is a poetry in couplets. It has an end rhyme, which is usually a phrase, a rhyming phrase.
Okay.
So I'm going to recite the first two couplets of each ghazal in Persian, and then we'll read the translations.
Right, that's lovely. So we'll get to actually hear the sound of it in the original tongue. And I have some illustrations here that I'll show, which are of another poem of Rumi's, a long narrative poem. So we're not showing you the text of the actual poem, but we're showing you what it looked like, what it would look like in manuscript.